privacy. So let me give you like a brief information about why are we giving this presentation. As you know, last year, 2018, we started this IoT Trust by Design campaign led by Frederick Dong. I've also been working on it, and during the campaign period, we've been to several policy fora to share our messages, and we had several requests from our community that, yeah, this is very interesting and fun, but it's like, you know, the situation in our country is kind of different. We don't know how to find an entry point to organize events, talk to consumers, policymakers, stakeholders. So it's like, can you provide some guidance? So take this presentation as a very honest exchange based on our experience in the last 1.5 years, in our personal trial and error sometimes, while trying to advocate for this campaign. So the campaign is called IoT Trust by Design. As Hans Peter said earlier, trust is bigger than just privacy, just security. It's a very human feeling. And as opposed to, in the previous presentation, information leakage by design, we propose some other thing called trust by design. So we have goals, we have what we want with this campaign is quite simple. We want security and privacy built into IoT devices and services, which we call trust by design, our initial goal. IoT is a very complex ecosystem. We're mainly focusing on consumer IoT because it covers almost 63% of the IoT market and heavily vulnerable with several inward and outward risks that I'll mention in a while. So how does this relate to our main mission for an open, globally connected, trustworthy, and secure internet for everyone? It's mostly focusing on the trustworthy and secure part, but as I said, it's also linked to our other activities. So there's heavy consolidation, concentration, vertical integration in the market too. So there are some arguments that you can put into your advocacy in your own local communities. So we want, with this campaign, trust to come as a standard. And where do our chapters fit into this equation? You are our natural advocates. It's nobody knows your local community, your country, your legislative environment, whatever environment in question, better than you guys. So we want to empower you as advocates so that we can work together to make this trust by design goal happen. Of course, in order to achieve this goal, we always talk about multi-stakeholderism, and in this case, it's not just like a nice to have thing, it's essential. So what we've been doing so far is we've been working with manufacturers to take actions to make sure that security and privacy elements are incorporated from the very initial design process through the product lifecycle, because lifecycle issues are critical in IoT. We're working with consumers because by the end of the day, consumers are the one who can shift demand in the market to push manufacturers to actually work towards that end. And we're also working with policymakers to create a policy environment which favors strong security and privacy features in IoT, and also not hinder innovation. So this is also important. We have several resources for that. Our work with manufacturers is heavily based on the Online Trust Alliance's IoT Trust Framework. We try to mobilize consumers to shift demand, to raise consumer awareness. For that, we partnered with Consumers International, the biggest consumer organization on a global level. I'm sure that Frederick and we have some other fellows who were in Estoril a couple of weeks, last week, for the Consumers International Summit, that we were sharing our messages with a wide audience from around the globe. And with regard to policymakers, we encourage them to push for better security and privacy features in IoT. We're talking about smart regulation, but regulation is not actually the only thing that policymakers can do. There are several other options, and we see regulation as more like a last resort option. There are several other things that policymakers do. And in our resources, policymakers or policymaking process is considered in a wider level. So industry, self-regulation industry, develop industry-led standards, privacy policies in general are all a part of this section of our campaign. We have a very simple problem statement. The connected world, we're living in this connected world. It's very convenient to have these connected devices. They are very efficient, but there is a shared risk for everyone involved. Because when we are talking about security and privacy of these connected devices, when it comes to privacy, for example, usually with consent requirements, let's say consent requirements, we don't, with these connected devices, you don't usually have the user interface that you have typically in your phone or in your computer. So that's a difficulty. To be informed, to give informed consent is kind of a difficulty. And also these devices, they just disappear in the environment, especially if you're talking about like home appliances. They're just super convenient to use. Most people get them, they're not informed enough. They have no idea that these devices are, might be spying on them. They don't know they are equipped with voice recognition, for example. If you buy a smart TV, which is the largest segment in the consumer IoT market, they're usually just buying a TV. They have no idea that they might be spying on them. So I usually steal one of our colleagues' cool sentence, Robin, if you're watching. He says that we call these devices smart, but actually they're pretty dumb. And I add an additional sentence there. They talk to each other and they do that behind your back. So it's not cool for people, it's not cool for machines. So we should be well informed about the risks without spreading paranoia. Of course, that's a very, well, we love technologies, like otherwise you wouldn't all be here, I think. And the manufacturers rush these devices because they are considered about cost. They don't want to spend. And they're worried about competitive concerns because some countries that I'm not going to name, they are also competing with like way cheaper devices. And these devices, these products usually have very short life cycles. So including privacy and security features from the start, it requires some time and it can add some extra cost in the process. So it's very important to incentivize the manufacturers. And as more and more devices are connected, privacy and security risks, they simply increase. So with this key message and our problem statement, again, I want to emphasize the importance of staying positive, but also realistic. Keep in mind that our aim is not spreading paranoia, but to build trust. We need to develop a single storyline to tie our objectives together around manufacturers, consumers, and policymakers, so our messaging is consistent. While we're determining our key messages, as I said earlier, IoT is a very complex ecosystem, and we are simply, for the sake of convenience, again, referring to devices. But the IoT ecosystem consists of devices, sensors, apps, platforms, services. So trust to such a complex ecosystem is defined only by its weakest link. And to obtain trust, privacy and security, they cannot be isolated from each other. So they complement. In the policy arena, we usually we usually hear a lot about this false dichotomy of privacy versus security. But in fact, they're quite complementary to each other. In the IoT scene, it's even more important and complementary. So as you see, if you Google IoT, you can find several cartoons and images like this. While trying to determine our messages, again, we need to state clearly that what is the risk of inaction? So what's exactly at stake? For users, if we don't have trust by design, their devices they're open to attacks ranging from annoying to digital theft to physical harm to some like really serious consequences. For manufacturers, their reputation might be damaged. There might be press coverage. Consumer demand might decrease. Some products might be recalled. You'd probably remember a couple of months ago, some parents, again, very worried parents, using their tracking device on kids' watch. So apparently, again, those devices were kind of spying and sharing location data of kids with other third parties without consent. So those products were recalled. The same thing happened with Kyla doll, you'll remember, that I learned by surprise that they're still available in some markets in Brussels, in some stores. The Kyla doll who is listening to you at your home's convenience, very private conversations also to your kid. It's still available in some stores. There can be liability issues. Companies might be sued if data is compromised or physical harm occurs. On a European level especially, we have to say Article 25 of GDPR, privacy by design and default, it really elevated the campaign because everybody was obsessed with legal consequences, sanctions, and fines under the GDPR. Again, I said we don't want to spread paranoia, but yeah, sometimes it helps. Just a little bit of scare tactics that might help. They might give a competitive disadvantage because some leaders might raise the bar, some SMEs, small companies might have to follow. And poorly secured devices, they simply affect the security of the global internet. The most common and infamous example of this is, as you know, the Mirai botnet attack, in which over 600,000 IoT devices turned into a botnet to start a DDoS attack, which resulted in severe financial loss and some lack of connectivity for some sites. So with our Trust by Design campaign, we intend to increase consumer trust. We try to accelerate the market, and also we want to minimize risk, which would minimize liability. And as you know, data minimization in general is a principle. With regard to the risks that we are facing because of poorly secured devices, first of all, we have inward risks directly on the user. They threaten individuals' online security, privacy, and safety. For example, a home with smart locks that have been compromised could allow criminals to have access without forcing entry. And some smart appliances can cause security risks, safety risks. An attacker might be able to disable the safety controls or deny usage, such as disrupting heating systems in winter. Tommy, I have to check with you on this. There has been an event in Finland during winter, where the heating systems were hacked, and I have managed to conveniently visit Finland only during summer, but I can guess that it's quite a severe result during winter. So how do we build a strategy? The key is to build an evidence-based approach and a fact-based approach, because we have tons of statistics that you can use, and people love to hear numbers. People love to hear facts, figures, some attacks happened, or what's the consequences, what are the real-time examples. People are really interested. So when we're talking about advocacy, it's not just a standard set of activities, but a strategic choice towards a feasible goal, which we intend to achieve, which is trust by design in our case. So building research-based evidence with facts and figures, real case studies. The advocacy process in your local community would be way easier. So we have several resources. This presentation itself is not about giving information specifically on these resources, but these are the ones we have, and we will be happy to provide more insight on these. These are all available in our website. We have the IoT Security for Policymakers paper. We have the IoT Privacy for Policymakers. It will be available soon, coming shortly out for community review. We have the recently released Economics of Consumer IoT Security paper, which focuses on the economics of building trust, which, as you know, usually when you include economics into the discussion, sometimes people are more eager to listen, especially policymakers and manufacturers. And we have the OTA IoT trust framework that I mentioned earlier. for which you will also have additional training available shortly by staff members from the OTA. Oh, sorry, I went. What do I do? So here are some facts. The number of IoT devices and systems connected to the internet will be more than 5 times the global population by 2022. Some more facts, I'm going to read them from in order not to make mistakes. So 59% of IoT devices fail to adequately explain to customers how their personal information was collected, used, and disclosed. 72% of them fail to explain how customers could delete their information from the device. 38% fail to include easily identifiable contract details if customers had privacy concerns. We also recently released a survey in partnership with Consumers International that most of users find IoT devices creepy. Creepy is the word that was used, which is quite realistic when you think about it. So most of the devices in concern is like home and residential, smart TVs, smart appliances, voice-activated home assistants, wireless printers, scanners, home automation tools, baby monitors, cameras, door locks, and other home security products, and some wearables. They're very convenient. More and more they look like accessories. They're very cool to have, but very few people actually know or care about because they're so convenient, they're so cool. We're not informed enough. I mean, even people, I don't know, it's like how many of you actually read the privacy policies of all of the devices that you own? I sometimes do, have to admit, not always. And I mean, if I don't do that, then probably we should not expect regular consumers to be that aware by default. And also it's another messaging very important for this campaign is like, we don't want to impose any additional burden on the consumers. I'm a lawyer, I have a legal background, I'm a legal nerd. So the traditional cardinal rule of liability is that you have some expectations from some group of people. So consumers, they don't produce anything, they are not manufacturers, they're not businessmen. So in most of European jurisdictions, both in like common law, civil law jurisdictions, the main criteria is reasonableness. So it's like the standard behavior of a reasonable, honest man who shows the reasonable duty of care. But from companies, from manufacturers, they're expected to be experienced businessmen. So it's like one step forward. So when manufacturers said that, oh, consumers don't care, it's all because of the consumers, it's a very cheap, it's a very poor attempt to just avoid taking the additional steps, which in fact they're legally obliged to in most of the cases. So it's very important that we don't create our messaging around consumers. Yes, we want to educate consumers, we want to raise awareness, we want to build trust, we want consumers to be able to be informed, to be able to shift the demand for market, to push manufacturers for trustworthy design, but we're not imposing any additional burden. Life is hard enough. While building our strategy, we need to identify our obstacles and identify our opportunities. So industry is usually not adequately addressing fundamental security, privacy, and life safety issues due to strong competitive pressures, and they need to rush these products into the market, and they need to reduce costs, understandably. Consumers are not aware of the risks, they're not well equipped to make informed choices, and many manufacturers are new to the networking in the internet arena and lack experience and skills because this trust by design process, it requires some certain skills and expertise, which might, again, add some extra cost. Because IoT is so hip, it's so sexy, everybody wants to have a connected device available on the market. So not everyone is traditionally experienced in this sector. Like some companies previously, like producing furniture, suddenly include technical IoT products in their product lines, and that doesn't always end well. We also have economic obstacles. First of all, the asymmetric information, we already mentioned that. The level of information between consumers and manufacturers, they don't add up. That's why, since consumers are not informed enough, they cannot shift demand, and manufacturers are not incentivized. And misaligned incentives, it's usually, it's not the manufacturer who is suffering from the impact of poorly secured devices. It usually doesn't even occur on the person who is buying the device. There are some externalities. So if my baby monitor is somehow used as a part of a botnet to commit a DDoS attack, and to me, I have this baby cam, it's working perfectly. I have no idea that this other DDoS attack thing is happening. I'm not aware. So the damage is not on the manufacturer, the damage is not on me. The damage is on the internet, so it affects the internet as a whole. The damage is significant, but again, the manufacturers might not be directly incentivized because of that. Oh. Am I going too far? Okay. Okay. I thought I went backwards. So again, when identifying our obstacles and opportunities, policymakers have a great opportunity in this equation to guide the IoT marketplace. To strengthen accountability, there are several initiatives on a European Union level and some national levels. For example, we now have in the EU a new regulation for transparency and fairness for online platforms to strengthen accountability in general, to promote the use of security signals. We're talking about trust marks and labels, but we should also note that when it comes to trust marks, you also have to be able to trust the trust mark. I learned, I don't know, last year, I think, you know, the CE European mark. I learned that there is another CE, looks almost the same, only slightly wider, which is for China exports. So you think that this is like European certified, very secure. It looks similar to the mere mortal eye. So it's essential that the trust mark should be trusted itself. And the policymakers, again, can do a lot to encourage a strong security culture among IoT stakeholders, provide strong incentives for better security and privacy practices, though this is not always through regulation. And they can simply foster technology and vendor neutral solutions. They can work with the industry for the development of some standards for security and privacy on IoT devices, and make smart use of any policy or regulatory tools if all else fails. Again, going back to like building a strategy, we need to map stakeholders. So in the IoT ecosystem, there are several actors. You have platform developers, you have app developers, you have platform operators, device vendors, policymakers, network operators, users, retailers, resellers, app services, protocol developers. So you know the environment in your community, in your local community, better than anyone else. But first, whenever you start something new, you need to have this kind of mapping of stakeholders that you can work with. Within these stakeholders, there are some allies and there are some obstacles. You might have some opposition, but the lucky thing that we have with regard to this campaign, unlike some other things that we're working on, even if they're opposing to what you claim when you're pushing for trust by design, because you have quite a wide consensus in the general public that this should be the case, your opposition is not going to be that much vocal. And also, you'll have many allies, and there's no need to duplicate efforts. That's what we did. We've been working with Mozilla, we've been working with Consumers International. So when you have allies working towards the same goal, it's unnecessary to duplicate any effort. So it's better to work together. So for instance, we can connect you with, if you try to create an event, or it's like a multi-stakeholder process that I'll turn to Lucian in a while, in the discussion part. We can contact you. We can put you in touch with your local Consumers International chapter that you can work together. because you're not alone in this, and this is a very actionable campaign, if you like, because everybody likes to hear about this, and it's very human. So we've been to lots of events, we've been to lots of like conferences, and when you're presenting something that you're working on, there's this moment that you think that it was a success when during the coffee break some people come over to talk to you. So whenever I've been presenting the campaign and our work and the main principles, that was always the case. It resonates so well because it's a very human problem. We're all using these devices. There's no escape from that. We're using them, they're convenient, but we should be aware of this risk. We are aware of this risk, and we're offering some resources and we're offering expertise. At ISOC, we have the ability to build bridges between technology and policy, and this is an excellent example and case study for success. So how do you build an action plan? It has to be specific to your local community with SMART goals. It's such a corporate term, but it helps. It has to be specific. It has to be measurable, so you cannot like aim to save the world. It's better to stay focused, have a clear message. It has to be measurable, so by the end of the day, you should be able to measure your success. It's simply creating an event, like bringing everyone together to start a discussion. It's lovely. We love that. We have that a lot, but we have these resources, so there should be some kind of action in the end, some kind of reference to your work so that it's measurable. And it has to be realistic, and it has to be time bound. So it's like, and time is not on our side. There are more and more insecure, poorly secured IoT products and devices are being pushed to the market. So time is unfortunately not on our side. So we can use, I mean, that's what we've been trying to do. We can use key events that are already happening in your local communities, such as like your national IGF or some other kind of conference. You can use those, or you can simply create new events or opportunities to discuss this with multiple stakeholders. What is something that brilliant community-led initiative that we do is, it started with Canada. They created this multi-stakeholder working group on IoT security, and they have now concluded their events. It's available on their website. You can check on our website too. And in Europe, France has started another initiative, again, a multi-stakeholder working group. So we have some regional cooperation, and following France, Senegal in Africa has started a similar initiative. And in Latin America, Uruguay is going through the same process. So it's like, as the name suggests, a multi-stakeholder IoT working group brings together the industry, consumer organizations, some regulators, civil society members, which are led by our chapter people. So it's our community is involved. These are community-led events. So we strongly encourage you to think about it, because in the end, what happened with Canada, and it's also happening in France and Senegal as well, there are some actionable principles. There's some resolutions that is favoring trust by design, which is based on consensus of all the multi-stakeholder parties involved. So it's a multi-stakeholder process from the very start, which is not always the case if you just aim for regulation. So this was a wonderful, wonderful process, and Lucian is going to be talking about it shortly. So there are some options for informing and raising awareness: capacity building activities, media campaigning, producing local content. We have plenty of content available. You can translate them into your local language. You know, we have funding opportunities available for chapters. And what you can do is first inform and raise awareness, then gradually you persuade and influence the stakeholders, and then move to action and capacity building activities such as policymakers and industry take action for better IoT security and privacy, or consumer choices actually manage to shift market demand. So there's a movement. And this is where you measure success. And for this, you need to find a tailored approach. So you need to understand your audience. So when we were talking about this, when your audience is when you're speaking about this campaign at a cybersecurity event, for example, that talking about like toys and wearables might sound fluffy. They're as important, but when you talk about the outward risks that we're facing, and when you mention Mirai botnet attack, then suddenly they're all ears and listening to you. So you need to have your message adapted to the audience that you have. So some of you are coming from countries that are producing these devices. Some of you are coming from countries that are mostly consuming these devices. So it's like, in the second case, you are more likely to give your message more clearly to the consumer audience. So this is when you'll probably be talking more about like wearables, home appliances, and those kinds of like real life examples and cases. So finding the best way to reach the audience is key. You need to speak in their jargon, stay focused. If your audience is not very technical, then maybe they don't know what a botnet is. They don't know what DDoS attack is. We love our acronyms. We're very accustomed, but not everybody is very comfortable with that jargon. So it's like the messaging while creating the campaign, it's very, very important. And as I said earlier, real life examples, which we have plenty, is very crucial. So what are the potential advocacy outcomes that we might expect from the stakeholders for better consumer IoT security and privacy? First of all, consumer education initiatives are critical on their own because we are trying to shift demand in the market, which is a tough sell. Proper review of products shared with the community, testings and comparisons objectively, and again, done in a trustable way is crucial. Self-certification initiatives and voluntary codes of practice developed by the industry in the EU certification movement is quite big. Now there's a common, with the EU cybersecurity package, there's a common European certification framework, which is now voluntary, but it doesn't need to be like fortune telling if that the direction is going towards some sort of a mandatory unified certification process. And we are also closely working with ENISA, the European Cybersecurity Agency, which has now a bigger mandate under the new upcoming regulation. And public procurement requirements are also crucial because governments are, yes, they're policymakers, they're regulators, but they're also consumers of these devices. So just like what's been tried to be done with IPv6, their public procurement practices should call for more secure devices with adequate level of protection of security and privacy. There might be some financial incentives, such as like tax breaks might be introduced for services and products that meet certain security standards. Responsible vulnerability disclosures should be encouraged because sometimes people, researchers who are trying to disclose these vulnerabilities feel threatened due to liability risks coming from manufacturers. So they might be protected, but of course, if the disclosure is done in a responsible way. If you have misleading manufacturers, again, there are ways to effective prosecution of them so that there's an incentive, or at least this is kind of a scare tactic as well, but the rest of the industry would know that there are going to be some consequences. Trust marks and labels, already mentioned. Some codes of practices and guidelines, such as the UK DCMS, there's currently a consultation. By the way, consultations are also a good way to give insight and for creating this continuous engagement with policymakers. So just in your local communities, you should follow what regulation is coming up. If there's a consultation, you should just contribute. If you don't know what to say exactly, you can always resort to us. We'll be happy to help. We'll be happy to work together with you. And if all else fails, regulation. But as you know, it's very hard to have smart regulation. It's very hard to have technology-proof regulation. So as a lawyer myself, I'm quite reluctant. So I think there are better ways to have better consumer IoT security and privacy without simply relying on regulation. all of these efforts are complementary, and the economics of IoT security paper that I mentioned earlier also suggests that this is the economic way to do, because regulation is the most costly and difficult to implement action. So if you can solve the problem somehow with like simpler and less costly alternatives, why not try that? So this is the end of my presentation. Please use our Twitter handle, social media handle, the Get IoT Smart. Visit our website. We have plenty of cool pictures. This little girl playing with the toy. And then there's this really funny video. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you see it. It's hilarious and in a very scary way. So if you visit our IoT website, all the resources I mentioned, they're available. And now I would like to start a discussion. So what's your personal experience? Because IoT campaign is quite a bestseller. All of our community members show clear interest in doing something, but sometimes they don't know how to concretely act. So what is your, in the prep call, I kindly suggested that you just check the policy environment or the market environment in your local communities and what might be the best option to engage with policymakers, engage with consumers, organize events. And I look forward to hearing from you. But I would like to start with Lucienne, who is co-chairing our French IoT multi-stakeholder working group, who can share his experiences.
I don't have any slides, but I'll try to share a quick thought on how the French working group is working. So basically, it's in the framework of what Ceren presented earlier. And the idea was to adapt it to the French perspective. So basically, in France, you have different regulatory bodies, a number of authorities, and we needed to basically have them on board to have anything effective. So we mounted a group on IoT security. I'm co-chairing it with Constance Baumler, that you all know, I'm sure. And the idea was to have a group with basically someone from either at the global level and obviously someone from France to make it easier to facilitate. In the group, we decided to have a multi-stakeholder approach. So obviously we have the technical community and people from academia, but we have direct involvement of government with the presence of the telecom regulator, so ARCEP in France, which is quite strong with regard to regulation and, well, yeah, right. We also have the cybersecurity regulator, the ANSI, and collaboration of a number of other academics linked to the two previous actors. And we wanted also to involve the private sector. So we have the MEDEF, which is one of the biggest representative from the industry, and the sign of IT, which is basically startups from the technical sector. Also, well, thanks to Estoril, I guess, in Portugal, we also involve consumers organization and the French one, UFC Que Choisir, to have the consumer views in the group. And we discussed it also extensively with the BUC at the European level, which is interested, obviously, by the French perspective. Maybe a quick word. We discussed it internationally, notably with the Canadian, which drafted the first trust mark concept. So idea was to try implementing something in France. And to do so, we wanted to focus on key principles that the French community could be interested in. And basically, we wanted to focus on security, clearly, on privacy within the European Union is quite a must, but also on interoperability and resilience, which are quite effective also in trying to push a concept, a trust mark and recommendation at the French level. So in this context, the work is drafting recommendation and we are going through a trust mark. We will most likely be presenting that at the French IGF on the 4th of July, and then try to, to push it at government level.
I'm also curious about what was the main challenge?
Well, the first maybe was to basically have everyone on board from the private sector and from government. It's always complicated because you need a lot of validation. Obviously, being the internet society and being seen as neutral, is quite helpful, and having quite a good relation to the public sector was quite essential in France. Knowing directly key stakeholders and being able to discuss on a bilateral basis with government key officials, so to have them on board, sending us, for example, policy officers, engineers, to work within the group.
Yeah, and also like speaking of incentivizing manufacturers, it's usually they try to come up with something when they think that regulation is on its way. So to prevent,
Clearly,
yeah, to prevent regulatory sanctions, they might be more willing to cooperate. I'm very curious to hear from you. What do you think can be done? It's like there's several opportunities. Some community members, they suggested like hackathons, like youth events. So it all depends on your community. Any suggestions, any ideas?
I don't know if my opinion is scary, but if people don't be afraid of the risk, we don't reach any of all of the goals, because the people like me or like you don't have the conscience about the risk. I don't know if we need to scare the people. I don't know. Okay? This is like a brainstorming. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. But what?
Okay. So can I scare you more? So if I look at the technical level, because I'm not a policy person, but technically I'm also working on IoT security in some projects. There is no perfect solution yet. So because of its hardware requirements and other things. So this is very good to educate people, to aware people. It can solve some deliberately or mistakenly done implementations, because the company may be trying to collect some data that it shouldn't. Yeah, that's good for it. But we should also focus that there is no standards yet. So we don't have standards. We have some companies which have their own solutions, but we are not aware that they work well or not, because as academicians, we don't have these resources to test them. And I don't know if these are tested yet. So this is my technical way. For example, we are just we made a scientific project and sent it to our science council, to TÜBİTAK. We are now working on using blockchain to solve the security and management problem of the IoT. But that will also take something like 3 years at least to have some academic results.
Yeah, and they're also like, the blockchain is like, I've been recently reading about how right to be forgotten, one like now becoming a legal obligation to have, is like almost impossible to apply. It's like, yeah, sure, but it's like now people are discussing that too. You know, blockchain is like, of course, it's wonderful, and I think at some point you have to accept that there's no absolute security, but we need to be careful. But sometimes I just remember right after I started with ISOC, at some event I was speaking on IoT security and privacy again, and I said this, and then somebody tweeted like, this techno-deterministic approach is going to be the end of us. It was ouch, but it's like, I was just trying to be realistic. Yeah, sorry, Tanya, please.
Two things. One is on one hand, we're saying it's hard to build trust, it takes time. On the other hand, we are saying trust by design. What am I missing? If it takes time to build trust, how can it be by design? Do you understand my point?
I do. No, but trust by design simply implies that you don't wait. This is also related to why we say trust by design, because as Hans Peter said, it's like trust is very hard to build, very easy to lose in like a second. And especially when you're talking about privacy, if it's compromised, it's compromised. There's no turning back. So we just want that. So there are no If you act after you have the breach, it's almost always too late. What we're advocating for is that these technological elements for better security and privacy are built into the technological process, from the design process of technology. And yeah, okay.
I mean, there is, so the privacy or trust by design is something that exists from the 90s for Dr. Kavoukian, if you remember, right?
We can question.
Yeah, you can. No, I'm not. I like the conversation that we have. There are now many standards that's being built. Etsy released a few weeks ago standard based on some principles that we totally abide with. Ceren, thank you, because Ceren presented in such a smart way, because it's a very complex conversation here. What we try to have with the internet society is to make sure that people understand also that we can go in an incremental way. We based our work on the OTA IoT trust framework, which is 40 principles that we feel that if manufacturers would follow those principles, there would be no big issues. Well, you can never say that, but we calculate that nearly zero ugly stuff that happened the last 3 years would have happened if manufacturers and IoT suppliers would have implemented those 40 principles. But we know that for many reasons, it's not possible for them to abide to those principles, because some of them believe that they might have really legal issues if they sign up to something and then there is suddenly a breach. So they are in a deep situation. So what we did is we tried to come up, and DCMS, as Ceren mentioned, also they come up, they are Brits, right? So they come up with something very pragmatic. This is one way of doing it. They have standards that they say, let's go up to 5, that we feel are very strong standards in principles, like no default password, notice of breach, vulnerability. So those are very strong principles. And we believe at Internet Society that we should follow that path, because those are the first step. And we believe that you go into the ladder of virtue if you start with those 5 principles. I don't know if I answer your question, but this is where we are.
It was just more a terminological remark,
Yeah. So trust by design, as Ceren said, is when in the architecture, in the design of the device, you include already those principles. As no default password, you can do that when you build the device. So that's what it is, right?
After privacy is compromised, it's just too late.
Okay, so the second one was about regulation. When we say regulation, it's often understood as governmental thing, but there are types of regulation, and I think that's actually where ISOC may take place, in the facilitation of, for example, self-regulatory.
Exactly.
So that's where.
That's why, yeah, exactly. That's what we've been trying to do so far in the last 1.5 years, and that's what the multi-stakeholder working groups are also trying to achieve in their own. Because it doesn't have to be like, we're trying to, like, building trust is, I already mentioned that we have to shift the mindset. That's what, like, new data protection laws are trying to do too. So we have to build a security of culture, it's a culture of security. And what the OTA IoT trust framework, there are some guidelines for consumers, there are some guidelines for businesses. It has like severe encryption, identification principles that should be observed, and already observed by several manufacturers already. But it also deals with the whole life cycle, like automatic updates, breach notifications. So it's like, while you're using the device, this trust by design process is a continuous process. But yes, you're absolutely right. And that's exactly what we're trying to do. And that's why we wanted to empower you, our community, as advocates, because this is a very important topic that is currently, it's a very hot topic. Everybody is interested. It's very relatable. It usually resonates very well in every kind of audience. So we would love to see you guys advocating for this in your own communities, and we're always happy to help.
So just a parallel, I'm kind of wondering how you go about with this, but something sticks with me when it comes to food. You have some like fair trade marks and stuff like that. Do we have a fair internet mark of some sort that could be stamped on products that are fair?
So these are like identifiers to give the consumer some information and some kind of like validation that the product that they're going to be purchasing shortly is a secure one. So there are several ways to do that. There's certainly a trend for certification and trust marks and smart labels of all sorts in general. So yeah, definitely. We can discuss this with...
That's such a beautiful logo to be.
Hi. So I think my question goes both to you and to Lucien. It's mostly because I personally was trying to kind of like organize multi-stakeholder gatherings and to try to, how do we talk about IoT? Well, it was more security and privacy by design, didn't have the language of trust by design, which I think is very good to kind of like uniting both. So I was just wondering, on the process side, I feel the greatest challenge is how do you build a common language between these different stakeholder groups? Because it seems that they come to the table with the understanding that, okay, they might even agree that security and privacy by design is important, but their conception of what are the protocols or what are the standards, more technically speaking, or even the conception of security and their interests in that conversation. Sometimes how do you work this out in the process, and how's the kind of like practical mundane experience of that? Because I think that is the most challenging point, because that is where the conversation starts. And even though we can agree on the principles, like how do we implement that? And I know that this is kind of like, how do you build trust on the process? How do you make people get to the table and have a language to kind of think about these things? But how do you go and actually ensure that we get a conversation that ends in, okay, the next step is the implementation? So that is, yeah, my question.
Very important.
You could take it as well as I would do, but that is a very clever question. You're absolutely right. So you were in Israel, so you can witness back as you were. But that's a very clever question. You need to know that there are different paths, of course. I mean, you got the Canadian example, you got the UK example, Australia has a set of principles. So we in the Internet Society, France is starting, Uruguay, and actually we understand that the Netherlands would love to start with us as well, which is a great news. So, but they're coming from different angles. So the Canadian guys, they've started really a bottom-up multi-stakeholder model, and they emphasize resiliency of the network or education of our users, while the UK goes another way. They want manufacturers to abide to some principles. They will come up, by the way, with a trust mark soon. It was announced in Israel that the government of UK will come with labels in different colors and a trust mark, which is great news as well. We just saying that all those avenues are great, providing they just help secure the Internet of Things. And we have created an informal platform, we call it this way, when those different governments can actually be represented and exchange their best practices so that we can actually come up to a kind of baselines that they will all agree on. So thank you for asking this, because I believe we would love to have something that can be used at global level, because otherwise you are manufacturers, what would you do if you need to import something in Canada and then in UK it's different? So we would like the Internet being global to have global solutions. I don't know, Lucien, if you want to add something, but thank you for the question.
I'll just add one word. Basically, it's why, for example, in France, we try to use building blocks to start from 5 key points and then build on these key points. So that the approach is not too aggressive, it's interoperable, and it could go from applying in France and also in other countries. Also, some manufacturers, some stakeholders from the private sector see it as a way of convincing consumers having a competitive edge of some sort, you know.
That's what we actually did. Like, as Frederick said, the IoT trust framework is consisting of 40 principles, but We recently issued a call before the summit to manufacturers in partnership with Mozilla and Consumers International, and which included 5 like key issues. So it's always I'm finding like a common ground to start with, and to evolve from that gradually would be the key to any kind of consensus building exercise. Yes, please.
Yes, hi. I'm going to be a little provocative and combining the two presentations before that we heard that nothing can be ever secure, and adding to the security layer also the manipulation layer. I mean, many of these devices, it's not enough just to be secure, because sometimes in the hands of corporations that have different motivations can manipulate our everyday life. I mean, I would be more critical, and I wouldn't take for granted that, yes, we want all these great things and we just have to make them secure. I think it's very important to keep always in mind the critical perspective of whether we need them and how this type of devices should, other type of certifications, not only security, but also, let's say, humanity certificates that we protect ourselves from our humanity and from our sovereignty and our agency, because many of these devices actually are meant to change our behavior. I think this is a very critical aspect that we...
These devices are like our limbs now.
Yes, no, but you said before, yes, we want them, but we have to make them secure. And I would say that we should never just state, I mean, this is a very simplified situation that we should avoid. We should create this type of dialectic and keep it always in mind.
Yeah, true. But it's like, let me remind you that this was like an oversimplified.
I know. I'm just raising the issue that it's not, the security is not our only challenge.
Yeah, of course. As I mentioned, the whole end goal of this is like to build trust, build a culture of trust. I also have another question to you after Tommy, because I know that in pretty easy privacy protocols, that is, you have this campaign which was Beyond the Net. It's like, so I was very curious about how your take is like, would you be interested in organizing something around IoT, around this? Yeah. Because we have like a lot of brain in this room, as already mentioned.
I'm not in this group. I cannot represent, but I want to say very quickly that I did a similar statement to them, provocative, that they should stop working on securing our communications for us to stop using the internet, because the less secure it is, the more, as an indication of a little bit my perspective. Yes, they would be very interested, but I cannot really represent the group.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's like there will be some follow-up exercises after this too. So, Tommy, sorry.
It's okay. I think that raising consumer awareness is important, but I don't think it will have very much impact even if it's successful. If you think about Cambridge Analytica, what might have raised awareness about the dangers of social media more than that, and what's the impact? I think next to nothing. How many in this room stopped using Facebook because of that?
Even if you did, that's probably too late.
So while it's important, I think that regulation is the key. And Europe could be showing the way in the regulation like it has done with privacy and GDPR and things like that. So I think that's the key, because the manufacturers, they are not going to do it voluntarily.
Yeah. That's why it's like we're working with these 3 pillars are essential to the campaign, but it's like, I still believe that we can, I mean, these actions are all complementing each other. And I know in Finland that with My Data, the Open Knowledge Foundation is, again, another Beyond the Net project that we have is, and they're simply working on raising awareness, not just to consumers, but like internet users, individuals in general, on their rights under the GDPR and the other data protection principles. Yes, Enzo.
Okay, about the role of consumers or individuals, I see 2 different approaches. The first one is certainly to push manufacturers, policymakers, and so on, to go as much as possible to security by design. But there is a second level approach, which is, as it was mentioned, the culture of security. Because we may have a system without no default password, no blank password, but then user will use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And if we don't reach that level of education, of awareness, the problem will still be there. Um, so I think this culture of security is a cross-cutting, by the way, because this will apply to IoT. I mean, it can. I don't know if you remember the story of the president of the US that had as a mandate. No, he felt that he should impose. I mean, he will feel comfortable when in this country no more VCR will be blinking the date, because there was no. 90% of Americans knew how to set the time properly in the VCR. So I think this is a basic, again, education, awareness, and so on as a cross-cutting element, which also may have a bigger impact in IoT.
So I would like to say something. In my case, I'm a hobbyist taking care of internet to be clean in a place where I operate an internet service provider. So I lead the internet service provider. So there it's the best laboratory ever for such issue. There are 2,000 rooms about, as many smart TVs, the same numbers, and about 5 IoT devices in each room, and a lot of garbage. So for me, the trust has to be zero in these devices, and all the time to separate data paths for this in order to protect. So we have to intervene first to stop shit to happen, because I don't like to read many abuse lists coming to us. My luck is that there is a medium level called the administration of the campus. It's a private campus. So they are interacting directly with the thousands of students. But the traffic profiles, it's a little bit scaring me. So the problems coming from IoT are bigger than the problems invented by the students, which is very bad on the side of the students. So, you know, this DDoS or other types of bad profiles of traffic, we have to cut immediately, and then they have some meetings and explain them how to handle if they are able to do this. But usually we do this. That's only to complete and to know that you get a resource like a big laboratory for such.
Yeah, we have views here. And you guys too, it's like, feel free to join the conversation. So. Because usually digital natives are very well versed with technology, but they don't have this like analog concept of privacy that some of us in the room has. So it's like, you have a different sense of privacy in my own experience with the discussions that we had in various youth events. And I was wondering, what's your take?
So actually, I was gonna go for more analog perspective of I'm not embracing the fully digital. Maybe I'm not. I'm more like old millennial. Yeah. But I was actually gonna comment on your comment because actually, I really don't think that I do. Let me rephrase that. I do think there is a purpose and there is a possibility and power in consumers in their agency. I do think that they can push back and call back specifically. And then I'm going to my analogical notion of privacy. I think it is different from a social network. It's different from Facebook. When something happens in your devices, in your home, which is your private space, and your notion of what's private is very tangible, and that object being there and being able to record these things is very different from your experience in sharing your personal and having conversations online. It's not, the line is not fully, it's not a either or, but I do think there is particular characteristics that actually make consumers much more powerful in this conversation than you would think in a social media platform when you're a prosumer or something like that. You're a producer of content and you're a consumer of content. But in that case, what I want to mean with that is that First, the notion of privacy and private space is very much tangible in that context. And also there is the financial aspect of it because you paid for that device. And so you want it not to perform in X way, which is different from some social media platforms such as Facebook. So I just wanted to go back to the point because I do think there is an important distinction over here as to how would we perceive privacy in the context of IoT security and privacy, and the privacy that we mean when we talk about fully digital kind of like atmospheres. And what atmospheres? What is that? But ecosystems, that's the word, ecosystems. Just wanted to point that and maybe start a conversation on that. Yeah, you have it.
Oh, apparently it goes away. No, no. I think when you put it down for a while, it goes off. Use this one. Okay. Okay.
Okay. Well, this kind of conversation, I suppose, our mind is rolling. Okay. If we have a huge responsibility, in my opinion, because if we delegate our responsibility in the government, like with the electrical grid, I suppose 100 years ago, uh, plenty of people died with the electricity shock. I don't know, but I suppose. Well, and then the government has the regulations about the electricity. Okay, but if we delegate our responsibility in the government, it's not electricity, it's our data. And in my case, it's my opinion, okay, got the got the record. No, it's a joke. It's a joke. Okay, but no, if I need, I tell you. Okay, in my opinion, I'm more scared with the government, with the other kind of people, and or the same, or the same, and this is an issue. We have a responsibility in achieve this kind of security.
Yeah, that's what like the global trend on privacy is going towards, like empowering the user. And
Thank you. Just to want to point out that trust is also vulnerability, and sometimes, not sometimes, probably in many times, the threat comes from the trusted source. So we have to be somehow balanced in this. I fully agree. I'm so happy to hear about this initiative, and I'll be even more happy if I can do something in my country. But yes, for long term, probably yes, but I couldn't say that I can manage to do something with these limited resources we have currently. So I wanted just to yes, definitely I will include this in the agenda of the Public Council on Internet Governance. But about the strategy, action plan, and so on, But yes, but I'd like to go beyond because the chapter is very, very small. Um, okay, I just wanted to say that no trust strategy is, in my opinion, the best strategy for security. But this is at the high level. I mean, I fully agree that we have to build trust, and on the layer of collaboration, it's very important to create proper standards, everything. But just don't to forget that trust is vulnerability, and we we have to be careful.
So it's like we can, and so it's like we have like roughly 15 minutes, and I kindly would like to hear from you more on like what are the concrete. My hair is here. Yeah. I mean, Melina, Milena is like, and I would like to hear like something like specific that just comes after you hearing this presentation. What is the initial thing that comes to your mind that you can do in your own community? After Milena.
So since coming from Serbia, non-EU country, Western
Oh,
Balkans,
I know.
your support would be our support would be, I think, essential because in Serbia there's no policy on IoT policy. So any kind of support would be grateful for. And during the work group, we already touched a little bit that topic also. And I said that based on my previous experience from my work in another field, migration and migration related other issues, security, etc. Since Serbia and some of other countries that are on their path to the EU influence, UN influence, other influence are really crucial. So I'm not going to talk about the government, the current government in Serbia or the previous one, but whichever is in power now, it can be really, how to say, not to say like, you should do this. But I think it would be really possible. And Serbia could be maybe not a guinea pig, but be maybe a good example on how ISOC can influence or help basically introduce certain policies, and for Serbian countries like us to use the best practices or just any kind of help.
Another main, while achieving this goal, we really believe in like community-led activities. But it's like your perspective is quite important because, I mean, we're covering a big region, so it's a very wide Europe. So, but EU, as you said, is a big influence, and I already said like GDPR really leveraged the campaign when we were promoting it in Europe, but also non-EU member states either have like an accession policy or like a harmonization obligation or some kind of partnership. So it's like, it's a convergence.
Exactly. So just maybe one example, when you're talking France, Canada, France, Senegal, etc. Serbia could in that sense be also, starting something similar.
Yeah, exactly.
And just when talking about partnerships and support, ISOC Serbia is about to start a joint project with UNDP and local NGO, Belgrade Open School, climate change and air pollution, which is going to be basically, it will start this summer, and devices that were created during the DESCON hackathons, previous ones, which ISOC Serbia is organizing for 5 years now. This summer again, we will basically use those devices in order to measure the air pollution, etc. So, joint projects and support and cooperation giving results, and I think that's what we are all interested in.
So I was wondering, like, how many of you, for instance, in the chapter reps would be interested in starting like a multi-stakeholder process, just like France, in your own communities? No pressure. We're just going to chase you forever. No. Okay, of course, Enzo.
A concrete proposal, of course, this multi-stakeholder approach is great, but something small and concrete, maybe to have some kind of toolkit that we could provide without logo to the government so that they can put their logo and they will be very happy to have to show up, to show off some kind of strategy with almost zero effort, as long as they take all the credit for it.
That's such a noble approach, Enzo.
I have one concrete suggestion. It would be the following. Since we are not actually even aware to which extent IoT is either policy covered or whatever aspect covered, we can, through ISOC, make studies about each of the regions or the countries, about the state in each country, and then coordinate the chapters among themselves so that we can make some kind of plan for joint effort about
Kudos. Lovely.
Okay. Around my mind, I have an idea. We in Spain, we have a strong consumer organization. Okay, several, but one of them is a strong one. Well, I will be talk with them about a joint initiative in order to announce actions.
And they're probably working with consumers intention too. We should check like which organization is working as a consumers international chapter.
Maybe the OCU.
That's very good, because this was the first time Internet Society has worked and partnered with a consumer organization. So it was like a test for us in the beginning, but it paid off so well. Like statistically, that I think in social media there is a huge difference for this, because like there is genuine consumer interest. At least there might not be enough awareness, but there's certainly an interest from the general public as consumers.
And the other idea, but we don't have money. Take the ISO videos about this video, okay, and translate and adapt to Spain. I'm thinking about talking with a comedian, you know, in order to make in order to make the videos and with the social media spread it. Well, we need locate the funds for the.
Yeah, we get the message.
Okay. Okay.
No, I'm sure we can further discuss about this like tomorrow with Neville as well. Tommy? Mike?
Is this on? Good. What we will be seeing in the near future is a lot more of business models where appliances are sold as service.
Yeah.
That will mean all kinds of smart appliances and appliances like refrigerators that are not traditionally connected, but they will be. And they are sold as a service, and they might be very cheap, but there is a catch, and the catch is that all the data that they produce is for the service provider to use as they like. So this is something that we should be aware of and maybe plan accordingly in our campaigns, and so that we know that it's coming and we should be ready for it.
Yeah, the OTA trust framework also covers this too. So it's like I'm referring to products or devices, but it's like it covers like services, appliances, everything. So yeah, but it should be better communicated. So it's not as many people are as informed as you are, obviously. Okay, our last like 4 minutes, Frederick? No? Oh, okay. No, I'm just, yeah, it's like, more coffee? Okay. No, it's like, this has been lovely. I enjoyed it a lot. I hope the feeling was mutual. And Frederick, you might, no. Yeah.
No, not much to say. It's like I'm enjoying it a lot.
And thank you. Another clap for Ceren, because it was a very, very good session. Thank you very much. It's critically important for us. I love what I've seen, that some of you volunteered to do something. A multi-stakeholder process is great. This is bottom-up. It takes time and energy, and we might help you doing this. And this guy there, Lucien, knows what we're talking about because he's in the middle of this in France. But I believe this is very rich as an experience. But you can take other avenues. As Ceren said, we have 3 pillars. You can just decide first to go and see manufacturers if you have some in your regions, or your policymakers, or even consumer organization. So you take the avenues that you feel more comfortable with your different hats. But we would love to follow up, Ceren and us, with those who volunteer to do something, because it's critically important. Yeah. I don't know what's happening. We don't have a break because we have